Here's what to do when your climbing plants have outgrown their poles. First thing I want to do is set this tall boy on its side. It has massively outgrown its pole by about, I don't know, 3 feet. I'm going to squeeze the sides of the pot here. I want to remove the plant from the pot. And squeezing the sides of the pot like this are going to loosen up the soil from the sides of the pot so that it slides out better. Not there yet. Staying alive, staying alive. Okay, let's see. There we go. All right. Good opportunity to assess the health of the roots. Anytime you're repotting a plant, always a good idea to take that opportunity to look at the roots of your plant. The health of the roots is the health of your plant. So while it's out of the pot, you're doing these little projects. Don't be in a hurry to just put it right back in the pot. You can wait a little while. Perfectly fine. Even if you keep it out for a couple of days, nothing's going to go wrong with your plant. So take the time, assess the health of your roots. What you're looking for are mushy roots. There's a distinct smell associated with root rot. So take the time, check the health of your plant. That's going to go a long ways in preserving the longevity and maintaining the health of your plant. Next up, we want to select a new pot size. Now, whenever you're repotting a plant, you want to go up 1 to 2 inches larger than the current diameter of the root ball, okay? So you measure the sides from side to side, and then you increase it just 1 or 2 inches larger than that. Some people will say that you can increase the pot size as much as you want. You could start with a 2-inch pot and put it into a 14-inch pot, for example. And that's true, you totally can do that. However, your room for error decreases significantly when you do that. The reason is because when you put your plant in too large of a pot, when your roots are surrounded by so much soil, that soil is going to stay wetter longer. The longer your soil stays wet, the increased risk you have of root rot. So my recommendation to make houseplant care easier for you and increase your room for error is to only go up 1 to 2 inches larger in pot size diameter. That's a general rule, but of course you can break the rules if you want and do a little bit of experimenting with yourself. I always say, let whatever I'm teaching you be a product of your own conclusion. This should just be a jumping off point. Listen to what I have to say on some of these videos, say, dang, that guy's crazy or something like that. And then go try it out for yourself. Don't believe me, don't believe just some random person on the internet. Go and work it out for yourself. Try it out for yourself, see what works for you. Next up, I'm just using a little piece of bamboo right here. I'm gonna loosen up a little bit of the sides of the root ball right here. Now, I like to do this just because got a big old piece of wood down here. Just because I like to loosen up the root ball a little bit, get a little air in there. Little root breakage actually stimulates some root growth, so it's not that big of a deal if you're going to break a few roots. I like to scratch the sides a little bit. Now this is going to get all these roots that have been swirling around the pots. When you break them apart or when you loosen them up like this, they're immediately going to start climbing into their new environment, to that new 1 or 2 inches of soil that you're going to be providing for them in their new pot. All right, that's plenty. That's plenty of roughing up for you. Now I want to remove the little Velcro straps that I have right here. I want to free the plant up and see if I can get this piece of wood out of the pot right here, out of the root ball, so we can exchange it for something taller. It's not that big of a deal if some of these roots break because they're not actually really doing that much for the plant. The plant is being tied up anyway, so it doesn't really need to be anchored to the new pole. It just kind of looks neat. They're not really collecting a whole lot of nutrients and moisture from the air like they would in nature. So if they break, give yourself some grace. It's not that big of a deal. Now, what I like to do to remove the current roots from the pole, actually sometimes you can just use your fingernail and they pop right off, especially when they're kind of dry and brittle like that. You can use anything to kind of scrape them off. Sometimes I'll even sneak a little razor blade under there and get them off that way. But it's perfectly fine just to kind of use your finger, scrape them off like this. Again, we're not terribly concerned about them staying 100% intact, but they're pretty good. I mean, they're super strong roots, so they're pretty good about not breaking too much anyway. So little by little, you can pry off the wood. You can pry off each one of these little roots. Get right down in there, get your nail under there and sort of pry them up just like so. It's a lot less daunting than you think, especially when you just kind of dive in and get started. That's about the best way, I think, to learn anything, is to just dive in, get started, learn the tricks. All right, and once you feel you've got most of the roots detached from your pole down here, I think I've got most of them kind of chiseled off of the original pole that it's on. It's just a little plank of wood here. We're going to have to cut these out. These roots are wrapped around the chunk of wood. It goes all the way through the root ball in this scenario. So we're going to have to cut it out, I think is going to be the best way to do it. I'm just using some standard household scissors here, so if you don't have pruners at home, perfectly fine. But we still want to sanitize them. You can use rubbing alcohol. I'm using hydrogen peroxide here. You can use a bleach solution. Lots of effective ways to sanitize your pruners. So we're just going to take it in right here and cut away right here and sort of split it open just like so. Looks like one of the roots is attached down all the way in the soil as well. There we go, pull it out. And we are free. Now we can set that aside, and now we can start to reconstruct everything with our new moss pole. Next thing I want to do, we're going to go into another nursery pot. This customer uses the cache pot system or a cover pot system, which means they just always repot their plants in nursery pots, 1 or 2 sizes larger, and then they slip this inside of a decorative pot. So this was the original pot right here, and you can see we're not going up, but about an inch. And that's really my recommendation when it comes to repotting your plants, absolutely. Now they brought this giant pole for me to use. It might touch the ceiling, oh boy. That's like 4 inches away from touching the ceiling. Okay, then you gotta position it wherever you want. Now, the original moss pole was in the center of the plant, so I'm just going to maintain that. I'm sure that's what the customer wants. I probably should have asked ahead of time. You can position it wherever you want. A lot of times with philodendron especially, or with plants whose leaves rotate, towards the sunlight, we'll put the moss pole in the back, and then the leaves will always be rotating towards the light anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But in this case, we're just going to have leaves all the way around. You can put your moss pole wherever you want though. All right, so we've got our segments done up right here. Kind of like to look and see how it's going to be, make sure everything is all right, because this is one of those projects where sometimes it feels like you need more than 2 hands. So doing things ahead of time before the big heft comes can be pretty helpful. Now today for my soil, I'm using the Philodendron mix from repotme.com, who is sponsoring this video. You can find a link to their store with all the different available houseplant soils, orchid soils, succulent soils, etc., in the link below. They have fantastic high quality soil mixtures, so you don't have to mix them yourselves, so you can rest assured that you're getting the exact right soil mixture for your houseplant. I like to put a little bit of it in the bottom here. Just cover an inch or so down in the bottom of the pot here. Smooth it out, even it out right here. And I am actually going to get my moss pole into place here before we stick it in the pot. And kind of just thread it right back up into that little cavity that we made when we took out the original moss pole. My issue here is going to be space. This is such a big old tall plant. Okay, that's more like it. Now, while it's on the side like this, I'm just going to use the same Velcro strips that the customer had before, and I'm going to attach the plant to the pole. Now, whenever you're attaching your philodendrons, your monstera, any plant whose petiole rotates, this is the petiole right here that I'm pinching down here. This is the petiole. So a lot of times philodendron and monstera, they will rotate their petiole to follow the sunlight. So they're maximizing their photosynthesis. So we don't want to tie this down, otherwise it will restrict the movement, and so it might not be able to maximize its photosynthesis. We want to tie the main stem. So make sure you're just tying the main stem whenever you're doing these projects. Wrap it around all the stems right here, being sure not to get any of those petioles. We can readjust this afterward, but this is really going to hold it in place while I get it into its new pot. Now, whenever you're choosing a material for what to tie up your plants with, you always want to use something that is as soft or softer than the stem that you're tying. So for example, I wouldn't want to use like a metal wire here. Eventually, the metal wire would cut into the fleshiness of the stem right there, and it would cut into it. Not a fantastic idea. This garden Velcro is made specifically for tying up your plant, so it's not going to damage anything. Might have to redo this afterward to make sure I didn't tie up any of those stems, but like I said, this will just be sort of temporary while we get into its new pot. Okay, now we can use our soil that we prepared right here. We're gonna get it into the new soil. Make sure you have all of your supplies ready to go. And we're ready to go into the new pot here. There we go. Tuck in all of those roots. Fantastic. That worked out like a gem. Now all we're going to do is backfill the plant. So we're going to get the new soil in there, tucked in all around the roots. The hard part is done, and we'll get to see the finished product here. So to ensure there are no gaps, we slap that pot. You can't overslap, but you can underslap. I say overslapping is better than underslapping. Don't take that out of context though. Okay, now we firm up the soil around there a little bit. It's got to hold this giant moss pole after all, right? Stand back, make sure your pole is nice and straight. Firm it in. Now when you are refilling your soil levels, you just want to be about 1 inch to a 1/2 inch below the total rim of the surface of the pot. So this right here. You want to let there be a little bit of a gap so when you water, the water is allowed to pool up and then sink in. Pool up, sink in. If I were to fill the soil all the way to the top, I would pour my water on there and it would just run off the side, make a little bit of a mess. So there's a little bit of a trick to keeping the mess away, to making your houseplant life a little bit easier. Go straight from the bag. There we go. Keep firming it in. I'm not pressing in so hard that I'm breaking the roots. I just want to firm it in enough so that it can support the tall plant. Almost there. 1 or 2 more good layers and I think we're going to be set. Make sure it's nice and straight. And that is how you repot and increase the stake for your climbing plants. Now going forward, I'm going to recommend this customer water it in immediately. Give it 100% thorough saturation, allowing the water to drain out of the bottom drainage holes several times. Continue with proper care. Obviously, they know what they're doing. But this is how you repot and replace the stake in your climbing plants.